there's certain things that you can and can't do. And what it really is really for troubleshooting purposes, right? It's not really to fire off information or to kind of show in the logs that you actually took action on anything. It's really trying to just make sure that you can see the information that you can see and how to troubleshoot that. So it's more around access. So the hiring process, what we went through last time is about position restriction, job requisitions, and how all of that works, and how to go through that whole process of hiring. So I'm going to try to do that today. Let's see how far we get, depending on the access that the specific user has. But I'm just going to continue forward, and then at the end, I'm going to jump into a tenant, so that way I can stay in the tenant. It seems like when other folks are trying to jump in, it cuts my access. So, you needed to make sure, like if you're doing something that an organization that has a staffing model of position, right? That you go ahead, you create a position. Once you create a position, you try to hire the employee, and the way that you get to hire someone is that they have to be a pre-hire already in the tenant. And as you saw last time, it's very limited the information that you're being asked on there. And then once you hire them, you get to fill in more of the information. And this is the specific pieces of data that need to be kind of filled in. So when you're doing this, and let's just go ahead then and create a pre-hire. I'm just going to put anyone's name in here. So, if of course, if you had the recruiting module, these candidates pre-hires would already be in the tenant through an integration, but we're only focusing right on the HCM part. So if your customer for whatever reason doesn't have all those things set up right now, you would go through this manual process. And yes, it's just basically a shell of a person. It's just to show that this person is here, and then they have no relationships to a position, to an org. They are just strictly a person with, just like you said, contact information. And that's all it is. And maybe this is a good thing. And sorry if it's review for, I'm not sure if more folks have joined, but just review for all of you. But if I just do this, and this is the other piece of data that I think I was mentioning, but wasn't part of my screenshot about instant messenger. I don't think most clients use this anymore, but and then web address. Sometimes they might put in their LinkedIn profile or that website that I was talking about that a lot of candidates seem to be having in this job market. But over here, I'll just put J Smith. So let me actually show you. The identifier, it's this, and configure this, right? So this is like the employee ID, hire employee business process. Maybe once the account is configured, then I fire off that I want this person to have an employee ID. So they can configure when they want the employee ID to be given to the person, but of course it doesn't start until this hire employee process. So that can all be configured, but they'll get this pre-hire ID. There is, and then the thing that I really wanted to show, right? Like this is how you know that somebody's a pre-hire, right? It's just the basic kind of information about the person, and they're not tied to a specific position. Consider for positions, yes, but if I click on this, I think it just takes me to this, right? But as soon as they're hired, that other view that I was showing you for, and let's even this profile, this is when they're actually tied to a position. They have all this other information, but when it's just, let's see, was this a pre-hire before? Oh, that card isn't in here. This is one way, I guess. Over here, so for web services and those APIs, this is where it becomes really important, right? Is there'll be an applicant ID, then it'll be, employee ID once this person is hired, and that'll be a completely different ID. And the customer can configure how they want those IDs to look like. Do they just want it to be numeric, alphanumeric, and what's the starting number, like all that kind of stuff. Or it could be system generated, right? Like Workday generated. There's no sequence generator that's configured by the customer. So and every person type, like, so let's say, I've hired this person as a contingent worker. They'll have a contingent worker ID. It won't be an employee ID. But then when they're hired as an actual, worker, then they'll have the worker ID. So there's many different IDs that a person can get in Workday, depending on all the different relationships that they have in Workday. So Workday will do all of that, right? So in terms of when I look back and at this person, it's just keeping track of it all behind the scenes. But because they progressed as an employee, they, in general, you won't care that this person was a pre-hire before, right? All you care about is what is kind of their thing now. And this automatically gets pulled in from their pre-hire information, right? Like, so, sorry, wrong thing. Or maybe this person doesn't have the contact information tab. Oh, here it is, contact. This information is just gonna, so whatever was part of the pre-hire, we'll just move on with them as the employee. And then, depending on the configuration that the customer has for that BP, for the higher BP, they might ask, and most, right, employers ask, confirm your contact information, submit your most updated contact information, right? And then the candidate does, or once they're an employee, they update it. So it's just continually, it can get updated, but it's taking the initial values that you put in as the pre-hire, right? It'll get updated either by the recruiter or the hiring manager or by the employee itself. But the starting point, it'll go ahead and just bring that information over from the pre-hire. I think maybe think about it a little bit differently. And I think this is the hardest thing for someone that's coming over from PeopleSoft, is that whole tables. I unfortunately or fortunately didn't have that kind of experience. So it's not about like the connections, right? Like that you have to figure out the connections. You just create a report. And like you said, if you're looking for a specific org and all the contact information on that org, you create a report on the org and ask for all the employees. You don't need to know the IDs or where to pull that contact information. You're just pulling the contact information for the employee, right? Irrelevant of it being a pre-hire. And I think I understand where the gap is, where you're going. It's not that the contact information has the ID, right? It's that once this pre-hire is an employee, that contact information becomes, the relationship goes to the employee now, not necessarily just stays with the pre-hire. So if you're building a report on the employee, you just need to ask for contact information for that employee. You're not looking, the only time IDs come into play is when you're really looking at the web services, right? Like you're building these web services to either update or get the information without the UI, right? Without the UI. So not even a report, without the UI, usually for updating a downstream system, right? And that's where you will probably need to use IDs, and you could use any one. Usually what you would use is the employee ID, because that's the latest person, right? That's the holistic person that person is right now in the system. They're no longer a pre-hire, they're not anything else. So you'll use that employee ID. And you can use the pre-hire ID, but now the ID that's the most relevant is the employee ID. And as long as you use the employee ID, anything that's connected, anything that you're seeing here for this Alex Patrick is all tied, because he's an employee right now, is all tied to the employee ID. So if you wanted to update, I don't know, their job details, or again, their contact information, their personal information, all you'd have to do is reference their ID. And if you wanted to pull any information about this specific individual, all you have to use is their employee ID. So if it's tied to the org that I'm going ahead and hiring an employee into, there's certain steps, right, that are going to be taking place. Start a background check, the HR partner is going to do that, propose compensation, and then here's the create Workday account. And then until it finishes this whole thing, they're not going to really be an employee. Usually around this time is where they're going to go ahead and get their Workday account, and then in the system, they possibly will get considered as an employee, and then they'll go ahead and get that employee ID. But every customer is going to configure this very, very differently, right? It could be update contact information, could be another thing in here for the employee before they get hired or after they get hired, whichever one. Then there's this onboarding BP that might get triggered after this. So every configuration is going to be different. But what you were asking about is that, yeah, in terms of you don't have to do anything manually behind the scenes as it's building that relationship and this BP is completed, then they'll go ahead and be an employee and they'll have all those connections and relationships. Cool. All right. So I will do the hire employee. Oops, wrong place. So I added this person in, right? John Smith. Let's see how many John Smiths come back. Only one. But if usually, I'm guessing, and more of the tenants for Workday customers, they'll have a lot more John Smiths, right? And this is where you would probably expand this, actually look at the, that's interesting, but look at this person. Is this really the right person? And I think it's more, what's interesting is usually you should be able to see the contact information. I think it's because of the user I'm logged in as, that I can't really see all of it right away. But I'd have to drill down a couple of steps and just make sure that this is the right person. And then let's see. Again, I'm a little limited today because of the person I'm logged in as. And I can't really change their security because I don't have implementer access or that super user access. But let's just start higher. And behind the scenes, I wanted this to go. She's up here, but in terms of she has several levels that are below her. So if somebody has several subordinates below you, then you can search by her, right? That's what this is saying over here. And let me go back. Supervisory organizations by manager hierarchy. So who has several managers kind of below that hierarchy, you could search by them. And so that's why like Joey Banks kind of shows up in here. All the people that are kind of at higher levels, like that executive level. So you could search by that and go down. And then this is specifically searching by, and this will probably take a little bit longer, all the probably managers in the system. And then this one is, if you wanted to go this route, it's basically just doing any kind of search, right? Like be it an org or a manager. So a lot of times, I see a lot of people using this rather than typing is when they really don't know who they're kind of looking for, and they kind of just use this to kind of help them, guide them or navigate them. But generally with large organizations, this takes a little bit more time. So it's better to kind of go outside of the search, see who you're actually looking for, and then come back in here and search. Remember, and this is the place that I was trying to get to, because again, like I was saying, I'm kind of limited in access. So I'm trying to make sure I hire this person into the right place. So this is what I was really looking for, this supervisory org, because right now I'm logged in as this guy, Alex, and he has access to this specific org, which is, I don't even know what this is, EXPPVT Ltd, a lot of acronyms. But I wanted to hire into this, but I couldn't remember. And so I was trying to look for Alex, but when I look at roles, he's not actually a manager. So I wouldn't have been able to get to this anyway. But really, what I want to show is I want to hire this person into this org, right? I need to hire them into a position. So it's irrelevant. This is just helping you do the navigation, right? Like this is just helping you find the area you want to hire this person into, the org that you want to hire into. And the way to kind of get to that org is, if I just like how I didn't remember the name, is you can search by different things to get to this basically information. So now that I know what that information is, I'll just type it in. So it's really the org, it's not the manager. I hope I made that clear. And see, this part is already filled in now because I'm hiring into the specific position rather than having to search for it. So hopefully that will help. Okay, and it's this was the supervisory org, I guess I was looking for. And then you get to, since I did the related actions off the position, it automatically, right, put that in. So when I do this, hopefully knowing and so hire date, let's go ahead, no problem. So the reason, you could put anything that you want in here, but let's say it's just, I'm filling a vacancy, new position, whatever. And that's really for reporting purposes, right? Like, let's say I wanted to see all the positions that were created and the reasons that we hired people into it, right? For tracking purposes. So I'm going to put full-time, but you could put part-time. These are all, and this is the job profile already, regular employee type, or let's see, for current country, there's all this other stuff. These are all things that, at the time that somebody's implementing, they're the ones that kind of give the requirements that these are the employee types that we want to track. And then I'll leave everything else. I can go ahead and put, whatever documents I want in this. Maybe it's the person's resume for whatever reason, or their driver's license, all that stuff. It just depends on the requirements that they have. And then once I put these documents, now they'll have a relationship to this document as well, and I'll be able to see it. So let's submit. And let's see what else. I thought I changed it. And it is going to fire a business process. So let's find out which business process, like did it take that hire employee default one or not? So here's just everything that it saved for this specific John Smith. This is the business process that got kicked off. So let's go ahead and see. And this step got completed, but I am sure. And this is the event. So what happens is every org is tied to, a BP gets tied to an org. So this one is tied to this hire employee one. And let's see if I could get to it. That's what I'd really like to do. This is the business process that it used. Oh, and it's not letting me go there. Here, view definition. Let's see if I have access to it. Great. So whoever created the supervisory org, right, tied it to a business process that doesn't have many steps. It's just the initiation step. And the reason that they probably did that is right now, just for training purposes, we don't want to log in as very many different people because we don't have access to start Proxy and do the approval and all this other stuff. But the reason I wanted to show you is anytime you fire off a business process. So in this case, I fired off a hire employee because that's exactly what I was doing. There's an event that gets created for that specific action that I took. So hire employee kicked off the hire business process, and it created an event for I'm going to hire John Smith because that's the person that I kicked off this event for. And as you saw in the other BP, there were multiple steps. This will let me know where I'm kind of stuck in the process. So if I was the manager and trying to see like, I've hired this person, but where am I stuck now? Who am I waiting for approvals on and stuff? I can just, that green check mark that I just showed you, as soon as I kicked it off, it said, process completed. It may not say process completed. It may say like, awaiting something, something. But over here, since it was only one step in the business process, it said basically that this overall status, it's fully complete. You can go ahead, look at this. And if there were more steps to this, then I'd see where is it kind of stuck. And that's really what, with business process, the thing that's kind of tricky, or the thing that you're constantly looking at, is where am I kind of stuck and how do I move this person forward? That initiation is part of every BP, where all that means is it's going to get kicked off. But if I go to the actual one that kind of has, even this one, I don't think is, I feel like people have played around with it, and they may have taken out steps, but you could have 30 steps in it. You could have 40 steps in it, right? So it's until the BP that's tied to that org is complete, that's what determines it. So in this case, let's say if my person that I was hiring into that org was actually tied to this BP, right? Then the next thing that would happen is it would get initiated, but it would be stuck over here where my HR partner for my org would be doing a background check. And until that was complete, they wouldn't be able to move forward. Then the compensation partner, this would get routed to the compensation partner, and they'd have to propose a compensation for the hire. Then usually it's that the employee needs to accept or sign a specific documentation, right? Accepting the compensation. So there's several different steps usually, right? But every company gets to define it, every org gets to define it, right? Because maybe what I have, the hiring process in the IT org is going to be very different than maybe in the HR group, right? They're looking for maybe different pieces of information. And even with international folks, non-US residents, there's like, isn't there like whatever check, the verification and all the other kind of background checks that need to go on. So BP is completely configurable, and the one that gets fired off is going to tell you how many kind of steps are in it. So you can have, like I said, I've seen BPs that have really gnarly, interesting stuff going on, and other BPs that are very like, it's a small shop, a small group, they just need like 2 or 3 things and then that's it. Configurable security, and specifically being in a security group. So when somebody is hired into Workday, they get, if you saw in that BP, usually they get a Workday account. So just consider that as a user. So I'm just a user, this Alex person that I was logged in as. They won't have any real access to anything at that point. They're just a user in Workday. But in order to get access to things, they need to be part of a security group. So all a security group is a collection of Workday users that you can link to one or more domains or business processes, and we'll get into domain and business processes, but security policies. And the way, and let's see what it says here. And we'll walk through this too, but basically you have to add them, that user, to a security group. And once they're added to the security group, depending on the domains that you give that security group access to or the business processes, they'll be able to do different things or see different things. If I look at Alex, like when he was created, he was just a user, but then if I go to his security profile, I'll be able to see what this person has access to and not access to. But since he's a controller, I'm just going to go to, I'm not sure why that's doing this, to this report. And this report is really important. And I think in the slides, they even talk about really important reports that will help you around security. But functional areas are all the different areas, right? Like in Workday right now in this specific tenant that make up different areas, right? Like, so you'll have, if you only want to look at, if you're only implementing HCM, you look at HCM, filter, and this is the stuff that, you know, anybody that you're implementing, let's say HCM, the HCM module, you'll probably need access or need to understand some of this, right? So the one that I'm going to look at is the, and I just wanted to do core compensation. So you'll see the functional areas for each area that kind of make up HCM. Some of them are kind of tied with, you know, different tools, I guess, in Workday that kind of span different areas that are used by many different functional areas. And then, but, you know, I think there's core compensation. That's the one that I'm looking for. Okay. Core compensation, and I'll let you know what this functional area is specifically. And then of course it's enabled in the tenant. There are like I think the first one that you saw is student, since GMS, Global Modern Services, isn't, has nothing to do with the student side. So that wasn't enabled. So it has enabled, no. But these are those domains. So, and all domains are a list of tasks and reports that you have access to. And then here's the business processes that Workday delivers that are kind of tied to this functional area, right? That makes sense in this functional area. So change default compensation, propose compensation change. Here's that proposed compensation for hire. So here's that step within that hire employee that kicked off another business process. So a sub business process, right? What you need is over here. So once I go into this functional area, so, and this includes, so that's a very high level of categorizing all the different domains, and let's actually go into a specific domain, a specific one that I wanted to show. Let's go into compensation change.
Basically, each component of a hire, let's say compensation or anything, is considered a domain. Is that what you're saying? Like, for example, it includes domain. So a compensation plans is almost like a task, but it's considered as a domain. So then you relate that to, is that how you assign security to it, what the person's entitled to do or not?
Yeah, and I think you're kind of taking it to just the business process, but let's say we remove that higher business process. Every piece of data in Workday is tied to a specific domain, right? And as you see, there's a lot of data, right? Even around compensation or the things that you could do to compensation or the reports for compensation. And all of them are bundled up into different domains. This domain is not going to have the same reports and tasks as this domain. Yes, it's part of compensation at a very high level, right? Here's the description: set up and manage compensation guide, like all this stuff you can do. And each of the domains underlying will give you access to certain pieces of data, certain tasks, certain reports. And then of course you can call that within different BPs, right? Like even the higher BP was calling another BP within the compensation. And I think it'll make more sense as I continue going through this, but I clicked on, I think, the compensation change, right? I clicked on compensation change, which is one of the many domains under this whole big umbrella of core compensation within HCM. And in here, so still same functional area, here's the domain that I was looking at. This is the parent for domains that control access to the various sections of the compensation change. And, you know, they're getting better and better about putting better descriptions. I think they didn't have much of a standard. They're getting better about putting better descriptions. This is one of them that I don't think is the best description. But over here, that was that parent domain, compensation change. But if you even think about it further, now they have subdomains. So in here, I could further granularly give access to certain users to only certain things. So let's just go into, let's say this, and I don't know that much about like this granularly about compensation. So I'll probably, excuse me, be learning with you guys. But this description now, this domain provides access to an employee's unit salary plan assignments during compensation transactions and in staffing transactions that include compensation. So we get access to this information, and it's telling me that there's 19 tasks, and they call it secured items, right? 19 tasks or reports. And I could either drill in here and kind of see, oh, these are the report fields that I'll have access to. These are the tasks. And then service operations. That we can just ignore. That is Workday lingo. And any documents, right? So, you know, usually I don't look at this part. What I really look at is this. To see, do I have view or modify access, or is the person that I need to be able to view the data, are they part of these security groups, right? So domains, again, are giving you access to either tasks, and here are those tasks, right? Or the reports, and here are the list of reports that if I have access to this domain, I can take action or report on or use these reports. And then I need to have be part of a security group. So let's say I want to go to compensation partner, and I'll go to that in a little bit. But that user, so that John Smith that I added, right? And I'm putting him in a specific position where he needs access, or his role needs access to compensation change. I'm going to make sure that he's part of, and usually it should be the right security group. Right now, there's many security groups that have access over here. But let's say I only had this one, compensation partner. I would need to make sure that that user is part of compensation partner security group. And I would also want to make sure that this is the right level of access that I want, right? I want him to be able to view the information, but also modify the information. So if there's anything, let's see if there's anything where, so propose unit salary plan, task, well, that's really a report. Oh, editing, right? Or maintaining. If I don't give him modify access, he won't be able to do this. And this tells you right here that this is a task, and the person needs to be able to have modify access. For the rest of these, they just need view. So if I determine, you know what, I don't want HR partners to be able to modify this information, then I'll just make sure over here to edit domain, edit permissions, and to take off modify, right? But over here, because the requirements were that everyone that's part of these security groups should have view and modify, I'll just go ahead and put that back. And what that means is, again, that they'll have access to all the securable actions and the reports. But HR auditor, all they're doing is reviewing the information. They don't need modify access. So that's why they have it here. So I've seen, you know, you can add instead of like bucketing it all here into one, you can always add the security groups as just lines and just do view modify. You know, I've just seen it different ways. It just depends on the person that's doing it. Some people are a little bit more OCD and they like to have, you know, per specific security group, one line for each security group, or you could just bundle it in if all of them need the same kind of access. Higher level, parent level domain, and which subdomains, like they're figuring out that whole hierarchy, and then also figuring out which tasks and reports tie to which domain. So that's all delivered. The thing, and they do deliver security groups. So many security groups will be delivered, but you can also create your own security group. Oh, here, perfect example. Contact information, right? Over here, there's so many domains, right? Some people should be able to see emergency contact, maybe just specifically to home address, work address, or just all the home address. Like there's so many ways that these can be configured. And over here, so let's just go to this one. So this is where it's telling you what modify can give you and what view can give you, right? So let's get something, some of this is, and actually, let me take a step back. So this report espresso, this is where like when you're reporting, you'll be able to view the information. Yeah, so these role-based security groups, so this one is constrained, right? And what that means is that they should only have access to the organizations. So over here, I said, applies to current organization and unassigned subordinates. So any org that's underneath it, I should be able to have access to this specific information and perform these tasks. If it was unconstrained, let me think of, then that's irrelevant of org, and you don't even get all this stuff. But if I could emphasize something is that security, you could see, right? Like how powerful security can be is if you just want certain pieces of data to be able to show for specific users, or what is it called? Them to only take action on certain things in an org or across orgs, you could do that. You have different ways of doing that and configuring it. So that would just be unconstrained, right? Unconstrained, it doesn't matter, irrelevant of the organization or where you are, you're just giving access to everything. And that's why Logan McNeil, she's part of all, and you have the user added to all different security groups. All your unconstrained security groups, I've made her an HR partner, I've made her a compensation partner, I've made her like everything, right? And now because she is part of all these security groups, she has access to all the domains, she has access to everything. The lowest level would be constrained and just at one org, right? So it could be, okay, so let's go back to functional areas. Okay, so we see that this Joy Banks, and there's all these members in here, they have different positions in here as well. And it's really these role-based security groups. So over here, if I search for manager, right? He's Steve Morgan. He's going to have, and then the manager role-based security group. So this is constrained. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to answer your question. So it's that these different roles are going to have access to different pieces of information, right? So I said that Steve Morgan is part of this manager security group, assignable roles security group, right? And he'll have access to the current organization, any unassigned, and anything that he supports, right? And the supervisory org, you saw, right? Like, because I have him as a role on this supervisory org, that's how he's going to get access, because he's part of the security group, the assignable role, put that on the supervisory org, and now he'll have manager access to this org, right? But let's say I don't want Steve Morgan to have access to what we were using in the other PowerPoint, right? He's not supposed to have manager access to one of the departments. I remove that access. I don't give him that role in there. Like over here, this is assigned. I could take this away from him and then he'll no longer have access. Does that help? And then each security group gets assigned, or these roles get assigned, right, to a supervisory org or that department. If I don't want a person to have, let's say out of the 3 departments that I was showing in that Jamboard, I just go ahead and just make sure that they don't have access, like a role on that specific security group, and they no longer will have access to do those specific tasks that are part of that role. So that securable item, right, is that specific task, is that specific report, or, and something that I guess this person didn't have access to, but for some reason now is showing up, is through these web services too. There's another area from where I was showing you view and modify, and actually I need to take a step back. I'll come back to that. Is that view and modify, that area, usually if there's also integrations like web services, so something outside of the UI that you need to do, that also shows up in a different area, because you shouldn't have like your HR partner kind of performing these. There's a different set of users that have access to this, which is called integration system users. So we could go over that when we're talking about integrations in a later class. But this, so I know I need access to some, like, let's say I was running a report or I was trying to review certain piece of data around compensation and I'm not seeing it. And it's like, well, why am I not seeing it? I would go, or let's say I'm troubleshooting for somebody else, proxying in as that person. I would use this report and see, you know, why don't I have access to this specific field? I pulled it into a report, but I can't see any of the information that's tied to the worker. And what I can do is look at this and be like, okay, yeah, this is exactly what I need. It's part of this functional area. Let me go ahead and look at view security. And what I see is this is the security policy for that domain. And these are the permitted security groups. Am I part of any of these? Oh, they don't have my specific, let's say, whatever it is, security group. Either I would need access to be part of that. Let me go in here. Either I would need to be a specific, let's say it's an HR partner. I need to be one of the users in this security group, or my security group needs to be added, right? So, and the way you do that is, let's say I wanted to add part of a security group that has access to it, right? View just gives you access to view the information, modify gives you access to modify the information. And let's say, and hopefully I don't mess anything up for anyone, but I need to edit this permission. And actually that just reminded me, I need to show one more thing. So let's say I take out benefits partner from here, right? Like they shouldn't even have view for whatever reason, view access. I'll get this alert, and this is really important, and it's so funny how many times people stumble on this, even no matter how seasoned they are. you go ahead, you remove this, and you get this alert, right? Saying that you need to activate your security policy changes. Because this is so important to what you have access to, what you can modify, that there's a report, there's logs that are keeping track of what you've changed. But they also want to make sure that you're aware that you just made this change. We're not going to immediately put this into effect because this might require an approval. But as an implementer or a super user, you should have be able to do it. It only goes into effect when you actually activate pending. Oh. So I don't think this person has access because this is not what I did. But usually it's called activates pending security changes. But this person doesn't have access. When you do that, it's very similar to this, letting you know what you actually changed. And so that way it's keeping a record of everything you changed. If you didn't want to change it, let's say, you did it accidentally and it was before you activated, all I have to do is just go back and not activate it. Just go ahead and put the benefits partner back in here. And click OK. And you have to make sure that whenever you make any changes around security, that you always do that. Is once you edit your permissions, then you go ahead and you activate your pending security changes. And then the other thing that sometimes, like, again, mostly when you're implementing. So now when you're working already with the customer that's live on Workday, is this whole disable, enable. When you're starting off, and especially with new, let's say, areas that are being, or new domains that are being delivered by Workday, you always have to make sure that you go in, if you're not seeing the data, and especially when you're reading the information. So whenever Workday delivers something, they will send out documentation with it. It won't be very comprehensive in terms of exactly what you need to do, but they'll let you know, hey, we just delivered this new thing. It'll help you do X, Y, Z. And this is the domain. They'll always let you know if there's a new domain because it's really important that you add the appropriate security on it, right? But they're not automatically enabled. So if I disable this, right? Then when I go back there, they might still have the security groups that are set up currently, but that just means that all of a sudden, all those tasks, reports, and everything, they'll no longer show in Workday because I disabled this specific area. But if I go back and I'm just going to cancel discard, the reason I'm showing you that is usually it's disabled already. And this is the area that'll tell you status. This one is an active, but anytime that you're not seeing, did I actually? Oh, and it's letting me know that it has that. So I'm going to cancel out of this. So this will let you know it still has the changes, the same ones that I was just doing, but that the status is active. But always the first thing I would do is if I don't have access to something, go to view security for securable items, find out which domain I don't have access to, right? Go to the domain and just make sure that it's active. If it's not active, where this says disable, you would just need to select enable. So just make sure that you select enable. just like how I don't have access to this specific task, it might be my manager, it might be a higher user security person, right? That is making sure that all the right security changes are being done correctly. So that's why there's this other task called activate pending security policy changes. And then in there, once I say yes, and then I even have to put a comment. Usually there's a section for a comment saying what changes I made, why I made them, sort of thing. So depending on your company, they might have specific policies in place. I might be able to say like, hey, I have a specific security group that's saying that they need access to this, but that approval, that activation needs to come from a different user that has access to the activate pending security policy changes. All right. And this one actually had integration stuff. So we will get into integrations later, but this is really around those this one is for reports, but the reports that are as a service. So not necessarily the reports that you're going to see in Workday, but those ones that get to be used in integrations and being able to pull this information and getting this information. So very similar to the view and modify. When you think about integrations, right, or these APIs, and in Workday specifically, SOAP and REST, is you're getting information out of the system, or you're putting information, writing information into Workday, but outside of the UI. So this is what this integration permissions is. And we'll definitely, later on, I think it's like one of the last sessions, get into integrations, because that's not something the Workday HCM course teaches you, but it's really nice to have that information when you're going for interviews, and or even when you're working with the customer. So view lets you see everything, modify lets you update the information, change the information within the UI, get and put, and this integration section is outside of the UI, making calls from your downstream system or your upstream system into Workday. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to show here is, let me take this off. And I don't know if I showed this previously, but I really like this when I first started using Workday, is being able to use this stuff in a report, right? Filtering on things, going ahead and using ascending, descending. I'm sure maybe people saw past something similar, but this is really nice to be able to do this. So let me go ahead. I think I did remove the filter. Great. So domains is something that we did go over, and then I'll kind of will leave you with the business process part of it. And then next time when I come back, I'll go through the specific slides and just kind of see where we need to kind of delve into a little bit deeper or not. So domains, like I said, tasks and reports, kind of what drives it here, and you give view or modify. Then there's this other piece, right? The business process. And let me just turn it to HCM. It's nice to have tenant access to actually be able to show you in the tenant rather than talking through screenshots. Okay, and then let's pick benefits. So let's say I want to change my benefits.